Gathered friends, listen again to our legend of the Bionicle.
Bionicle was probably the most ambitious children's franchise I've ever seen. It was a true multimedia project, spanning comics, novels, audio dramas, movies, video games, online flash games, and of course the toys themselves. Over its decade-long original run, the series grew with its audience, but never did it baby the audience. It treated the intelligence of kids with respect. This was done by aiming the writing towards the upper end of their target audience. I remember an interview with someone who worked on the franchise, saying how they aimed for older children, as it's easier to get young kids interested in something targeted at a higher age group than it is the other way around. One of the most impressive things about Bionicle for me was the universe. The world building in this children's toy franchise was comparable to something like Lord of the Rings. The first few years really capitalised on this part. If we look back at the original Matanui arc from 2001 to 2003, we had two groups of perspective characters. The Six Toa, who are the focus of the novels and comics, and then Takua, the chronicler, who was the focus of the games and the movie. The whole island is a mystery, and we learn about it as the main cast do. The Toa, being new to Matanui, know nothing of the island, its inhabitants, and the mysteries within. They themselves are also a mystery. Whereas Takua had amnesia in his main appearance, so he also learnt about the world with us. Takua's actually the most important part here, or more specifically the Matanui online game is. For the first year of Bionicle, there were very few comics, so this was many people's introduction to the world of Bionicle. Takua is the perfect conduit for the audience to learn about the world. He's naturally inquisitive, and with his amnesia, he learns about the island as the player does. With Takua becoming the chronicler, he gets to witness all these major events around him, crossing paths with the Toa while they're on their own separate quest for the Masks of Power. Through this interactive experience, you directly get to know the inhabitants of the island, their unique quirks, and hear from them stories that would later appear fully in comics and books. You hear names of things such as the Trencron Break and Kininui, and hear mentions of beasts such as the Kofujaga and Kumanui, and don't actually see them, with the impetus being on the player to read further into it, through either comics, encyclopedias, or buying the toys. Everything is named, and this really helps to create a living world. Come 2003, and Bionicle had reached the peak of its popularity. They released books which explained the previous 2 years' story in greater detail. And though the mysteries of Matanui still grew, more and more were answered. By the end of the story, it felt complete, with Takua graduating to becoming a fully fledged hero, no longer the mere chronicler of events. But they went deeper. No, literally, they went deeper beneath Matanui. The long-forgotten high-tech city of Metronui was discovered underneath the island of Matanui, creating a whole new world to explore. The next couple of years were spent in a prequel, greatly expanding the world, introducing concepts such as Other Toa, the Dark Hunters, providing payoff for the previously mysterious Turaga. As well as this, we saw the origin of plot elements from the original story. Throughout all of this, they continued to release stories in multiple different forms of media. What was impressive here, just watching the movies, you'd have an understanding of what was happening. You could read the comics and follow along, read the novels and you'd learn even more in-depth parts of the story. As a kid, I thought I knew most of what was happening, but when I look back as an adult, I was barely scratching the surface. I'd compare it to something more recent, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You could watch just the Bionicle movies, and that's like the Avengers. But there were all these different elements that formed part of a greater universe of interlinked stories, and seeing one part helped you appreciate the others even more. The Mask of Life arc over the next few years expanded this universe so much further than any other story. We found out about so many more islands in the Matoran universe. Minor characters from years before returned in major roles. We learnt more about the ancient history of the universe, with organisations such as the Order of Matanui, the Hand of Artaka, the Brotherhood of Makuta, culminating in a reveal that blew my 11-year-old mind. The whole universe that we'd seen thus far was the body of a giant robot, and that giant robot was Matanui, the Bionicle's god. Now this probably sounds like a dumb out-of-nowhere twist, but while it certainly wasn't something I expected, so much of what we already knew made sense once it came out. It was during this period that the final great aspect of Bionicle launched, BionicleStory.com. This was a website that hosted many online stories, but the stories it told were some of the most interesting ones. Stories set completely apart from whatever the main storyline at the time was, featuring characters that had been absent for years, characters that never received sets, stories in parallel timelines, through character blogs, short stories and audio dramas, yet all led back into the greater narrative. There's something magical about exploring a world unlike our own. Every discovery feels that much more rewarding when you're the one to explore and find it. It's one of the reasons I love video games. Through its extra story serials, especially those found on BionicleStory.com, you are being challenged to find out more of the story for yourself. You are given the most basic elements of the narrative through the movies and comics, which I'll add were free to read online or as part of the free Lego Club magazine. From there, you could explore wherever you wanted. Your set came with a CD-ROM? Put it in your computer and play a game to learn about those characters. Want to find out about other events happening while the main story unravels? Browse BionicleStory.com. There were always at least 3 ongoing serials there. If you wanted to see more about the main story in greater detail, there were the books. You could get encyclopedias to learn more about the world and events you've missed. There was just so much content there, and it was waiting for you to discover it. However, this vast universe would prove to be the eventual downfall of Bionicle. In its final years, Bionicle took to space, and we got to see whole other planets. All of which, by the way, still fell perfectly within the established world building. We learnt of even further back history. The great beings, Matanui's creators, were like something out of Greek mythology. But there was only so dense a series could get before it started putting off newcomers, and for a franchise primarily created to sell toys, this was a problem. Children grow into adults. LEGO needed to attract new kids, otherwise they couldn't sell their toys. Remember, a lot of this story was being released at the low price of free, so selling the toys was vital. With all these names for places, creatures and things to learn, Bionicle's greatest asset killed it. While the main story did wrap up, it was clear it wasn't as intended. The narrative jumped to the final battle, and those online story serials mentioned earlier weren't able to wrap up. Thus they formed unsatisfactory loose ends. Head writer Greg Farshtey continued to support the community for years after the series stopped, producing new content and providing fans with a little closure. But largely, for the next 5 years, it was forgotten. A reboot of the franchise came in 2015, and an attempt to do the same as before was made. They released books, online animations, and a free mobile game, very similar to the first year of the original run. But even the first year of the original run had Takua's story, as well as that of the Toa. This just had one linear story through the web animations, with certain parts being in more detail if you read the books. Not only that, but the animation was all voiced by one man, even the female characters. Greg's audio dramas at least had his wife appear to voice other characters. Another area where the reboot failed was the packaging. See this? This is a Toa canister, a mythical vehicle that transported the Toa to the island of Matanui. Now this is just a cardboard box. The reboot only lasted for 2 years, and will in all likelihood be forgotten. Unlike the original generation, this rebooted series failed to develop its world, using generic terms such as Master rather than Toa, and not even putting names on the boxes of minor character sets. The reboot didn't seem to trust children to find the story for themselves, and kept it simple, thus missing a large part of what made the original so great. So back to the title. Why does Bionicle matter? It taught us that just because something's aimed at children, that's no excuse for making it shallow. It taught us to respect the intelligence of children, and it taught a generation to demand more from their media. The lasting impact of Bionicle is apparent, just looking at how active its Facebook and Reddit communities are for a 10 years dead franchise. I don't want to let these stories die, so I've got an idea to do some Bionicle storytelling videos. If you'd be interested in that sort of thing, let me know down in the comments, and subscribe so you have a chance to see them. I've been Tonsa, and until we meet again, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day.